Frontier Society. He was media director for Jerry O'Neill. He's a co-founder of Unicorp. He's created many political announcements for space. He appears on the television networks, national newspapers. He's the co-founder and president of the Space Frontier Foundation. The Space Frontier Foundation is working on a concept known as Alphatown, which is taking Space Station Alpha, I guess, making some of these what they feel something useful out of. So I'll turn it over to Rick.
Oh, I can do without a mic, that's fine.
All right.
Project, he said. First of all, I want to say some of the slides I'm going to show you, some of the old timers have probably seen. But I'll remind you that there's a new world out there. In fact, in the foundation, I'm challenging the rest of my board and the advocates, which are the inner circle of the foundation right now, to quit coming to conferences like this and start getting out there in the field and giving these kinds of talks to people. Because we're spending a lot of time talking to each other, and it's time to start letting people know there's good news out there. So, let me start with my first slide. Now, just focus it, don't worry about the end. Just the focus. Whoops. You got to focus, but go on there. Yeah, but it only goes so far.
You better back up.
Okay, we need to go back a way. Okay, this is an X presentation. We're working out the bugs. We'll get to the real ones.
I hope it doesn't take as long as naturally to get the shuttle built.
We get maybe a little bit different light. Is that possible? Just on this end? All right, well, let me see here. Actually, this isn't a mistake. This is my first slide. This is America's vision of its future right now. This is what people see for tomorrow. This is where America thinks it's going. Nowhere. Now, I was recently out in LA talking to people in kind of the Hollywood crowd, and so to use some metaphors or whatever out there, I asked, you know, what do they see in the future? And you can put it in terms of movies. What people see in the future is basically nothing. Mad Max, Blade Runner, or God forbid, Waterworld. That's what we've offered the future. That's the future we've offered the American people. The generation that's taking over right now, we've handed a mop, a broom, and a shovel and said, it's yours to clean up, we got you this far. We told them the greatest moments in history are in their past. That is Buzz's head up there, by the way. We spent a lot of time talking about the past. In the foundation, we had a little saying during the Apollo anniversary. 25 years after Jamestown, the wagons were rolling west. 25 years after the first airplanes flew, people were flying across the country. 25 years after Apollo, we had a bunch of old astronauts on TV reminiscing about the good old days. We're creating a culture that has less expectations of the future than they do the past. We talk about such things as sustainable growth, which is, by the way, an oxymoron in a closed system. Soon you hit the walls. We've created a culture of limits. The future is a narrowing wedge, the way it's being portrayed to the youth of America and the youth of the world. We're telling them they have less in their future than we've had in the past. People have to work harder to get the same things. Nature is rapidly disappearing under our feet. I used to collect, when I was a little kid growing up in West Texas, we used to collect little creatures called horny toads, have horny toad races. I was stunned recently to find out they're an endangered species. In my lifetime that's happened. It's happening around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it's this type of an attitude that creates a little thing called Generation X. I'm sure the fall of Rome was characterized by statements like, remember when? Remember the good old days when we could build those things down there on the hill. Can't build them anymore. Generation X, we created it. What are we going to do with it? Well, I say it's time to break out of the box. Break out of the cage. remove the limits. It's time to create a new mission for America. It was well stated back in 1986 by President Reagan's National Commission on Space, which unfortunately was stepped on by the explosion of the Challenger. But this is a brilliant statement. It says it very well. A new mission for America to lead the exploration and development of the space frontier, advancing science, technology, and enterprise, and building institutions and systems that make accessible vast new resources and support human settlements beyond Earth orbit, from the islands of the moon to the plains of Mars. Notice we're inclusive, not exclusive here. That's what frontiers are about. Unfortunately, the space program we have today has nothing to do with that. The space program we have today is a linear set of bureaucratic dominoes, one lined up after the other, leading in a straight line into the future if the budget holds out. And of course, as we know, the budgets are going down. We've got a very elitist space program right now. It was based on a Cold War National Socialist model, a mix of the von Braunian import plugged into sort of a quasi-military campaign to take the technological high ground of the moon before the Russians did. We won the war, we won the Cold War, we kept the establishment that did it. And as a result of that, all the programs we see in our government space program reflect this sort of elitist approach to the future. For example, although we need badly a vision of the future that is inclusive of everybody, gives everybody a chance to participate, based on that programmatic, elitist, government-run bureaucratic space station program, for example, well, I'll put it this way. 4 to 8 people out of the billions of people on Earth have a very nice future ahead of them at a time. The 4 to 8 people that get to fly in this facility are going to have a magnificent future. The rest of us can watch on TV while we demonstrate slinkies. This is where the Space Frontier Foundation comes in. We take an unmoving stand for the frontier. We take an unmoving stand for settlement. We move directly in when targeted actions to change what is going on in the space program to create a national space agenda. We do not confuse activity for effectiveness in the Space Frontier Foundation. We work to the target, to the point, and make the changes that we think are needed to keep us on the track to the frontier. We fought many fights in the Space Frontier Foundation. We were the first pro-humans in space organization to come out against the space station because we didn't believe it was going to get us to an open frontier as quickly as we needed to get there. We've taken these fights at some cost. Some of us have literally had our lives threatened over those issues. So when I begin to talk about Alphatown, the space station, in a moment, I could say we have enough scars to maybe have a tiny bit of credibility on the issue. This is our model of the future, the American frontier. Oklahoma, when they fired the gun in the air. People of all types, kinds, persuasions, taking all kinds of transportation, all kinds of dreams, heading west, and creating out of nothing the greatest country in the world. That's the model we believe in. It was a model based on individual initiative and cooperation, a model that created the American family system, a model that created the greatest nation the planet has ever seen. And by the way, this model wasn't just in the Old West. This is a model that worked in Rome as well. So if you want to be PC and not offend people who are worried about native cultures who, much to their chagrin, were discovered and later wiped out, although they didn't know they needed to be discovered, you can talk about Rome. What happens when a culture has confidence in the future, when a culture is feeling very positive about where it's going, is that it will reach out beyond its borders. And there's 2 ways, by the way. If a culture is also paranoid, a culture will surround itself with fortresses and lock itself in. But on the upswing, when a culture is growing, that confidence will be exhibited by fortresses or government facilities, let's say, since it's the 90s, placed slightly beyond their border. Now, those government facilities are not only a statement of national confidence in the future, but what they do is they act as catalysts around which cities can grow. They place this government facility out in the edge of the frontier, and it begins to buy goods and services from people around it, the woodsmen, the local farmers. Suddenly a small trading outpost will start to grow around the outsides of the government facility. Pretty soon those people start trading with each other. It is also in the interest of the nation concerned to make sure the transportation routes to and from, let's say, Rome, are kept open and are kept viable. You've seen Roman roads all over Europe. They're the long, straight ones that they didn't have a lot of property problems back then. They just sort of send it, leave it, and go. So we have precedents throughout history, and it's not just the Old West, which is what those of us in the space movement use quite a bit. It has happened many times throughout history. Now, this is our idea for how to transform the space program itself. Frankly, the Space Frontier Foundation recently adopted a model, a psychological model, of basically sort of a jujitsu model. After we pulled out of our offense on the station the year that it passed by one vote and decided to trade that in for support of cheap access to space, which we literally did with the administrator, and agreed not to attack station for a couple of years, we set up some mandates that we wanted to see delivered on. Number one, we wanted to see the use of Russian facilities and equipment through commercial negotiations. Now, the State Department stepped in and we have what we have now, but it's going in the right direction and it's opened up a lot of possibilities. A lot of entrepreneurial firms now are working with the Russians on all kinds of activities. I think, frankly, even if there is a transition over there, they know what side their bread is buttered on. And they also realize their space program is the one thing that keeps them from being a developing nation. So I think that will stay there. We have worked also, we worked to see that, well, I'll put it this way, we held out another standard for station was that if the space station modules, the development of station were to continue in private development, in other words, if that same assembly line that was used to create station would then be cranking out those modules for private use, we would begin to look at supporting station. Well, that's going on. Chuck Lauer, who will be talking about space hotels, is working very closely with Boeing right now to do just that. So some of our standards have started to be met, and we're very excited about that. But the idea of Alphatown is to take the existing government facility and jujitsu it, use its own energy, its own force, its own bureaucratic momentum to get what we want, which is an open frontier in space. The idea is to take the people who are working on station, the leaders in Congress, the leaders in the White House, and get them inside of a new mentality. A mentality which is actually incredibly American. And that is, you are building a small town. You are out there in the wilderness. You've come across, let's say, an intersection in two highways, which, by the way, are probably government funded at some level in their development. And you've decided to build a small town. What do you do? How do you make that happen? Well, we would see such things as a, oh, by the way, the idea is to take that small town, to take the space station, use it as a catalyst, use that leverage, the purchasing power, the markets that are created by the station, and create what we call Alphatown. Now, Alphatown, this is just a symbol of it. By the way, it wouldn't be all connected on one truss. I'll get to that in just a moment. The idea of Alphatown, again, is a small town. Alphatown, the first human town in space. That's the concept we're pushing for here. Now, at some point, the idea would be you'd have town council meetings, or Chamber of Commerce, let's say. Okay, now we're going to try and hold this fall the first Alphatown Town Council meeting in Washington, and try and pull together the potential users of the station, begin benchmarking what it is they need to begin developing a town around the gate, or outside the airlocks of the space station. We're also going to be looking at the creation of a Chamber of Commerce, which we would like to see actually become an institution. We have a lot of scientists telling us what we can't do vis-a-vis free enterprise on the station. We want to get an organized front for those of us who want to create a profit in space, because as we say in the foundation, nobody stays till somebody pays. Now, one of the first things we have to do is begin to encourage, oops, sorry, moving on this for a second. One of the first things we have to do is begin to encourage what goes on around the station through the use of laws and changing policies. We have 4 or 5 principles the foundation is backing in this area. The first one is the development of cheap access to space. It is time to end the era of national spaceships. That's why the Space Frontier Foundation coined the term cheap access to space. That's why we're one of the first organizations out there fighting for the DCX. It's one of the organizations that has kept the X-33 alive through our work on the Hill and in the media. We believe in cheap access to space. One of the first steps that goes on right now, in parallel to the development of the reusable launch vehicles by commercial firms, has got to be the privatization, complete privatization and commercialization of the space shuttle. Which, by the way, I must say honestly, if I believe it has to compete with RLVs, will soon become a very nice monument in front of your local theme park. But I say let's let the market decide that. Now, one of the ways we want to make this happen is to use the space station's needs to create markets, as I said before. The way we would do this with cheap access to space is to mandate that all transportation to and from the American portion of the station will be competitively bid by American private providers, thus creating a very small, but at least understandable to the aerospace companies and the companies involved in developing these vehicles, an understandable market. Also gives a small market to the potential winners of the X Prize, which is another organization and activity we support. I'm one of the trustees of that organization. We also need other destinations in space to grow this market, other places for people to go and for activities to be carried on. Therefore, we would like to see passed laws that encourage the recycling of all volume-holding facilities or objects in space. In other words, if it can hold an atmosphere, it has value. Frankly, in space, raw sewage has value, about $10,000 a pound. So you can imagine that aerospace-grade metals and those types of things would have incredible value. So for example, this is an external tank-based space facility. Right now, we carry the external tank 99% of the way into orbit, and we ditch it conveniently over the Pacific Ocean where nobody can see it. There are plans out there to convert external tanks into 14-story buildings. Now, of course, in the old model of space station, if you were a bureaucrat working for NASA, you would take this as a threat, because you would pull up in front of that congressional committee, and some southern senator was going to sit up there and go, well, son, I tell you what, you want me to give you $40 billion for this, for your space station? Well, I got some guys out here that are offering me $10 million to have free external, or to take external tanks off my hands and turn them into 14-story buildings. Zero goes your budget, buddy. That is a different mindset than what would happen if the nation adopted the concept of Alphatown. Because at that point, if NASA becomes a part of the creation of Alphatown, these same bureaucrats are going to be judged on how successful they are at aiding this kind of development. It's the jiu-jitsu model. It's getting them on our side. It's judging them by our standards we set, standards that open the frontier. Oh, by the way, get back up. This also includes encouraging the recycling of facilities already up there, such as Mir. I can't believe anybody would even consider the idea that you would want to deorbit this or burn it up or trash it. Again, 1 pound of raw sewage goes for $10,000 in space. This thing weighs hundreds of tons. It contains all kinds of metals, and at a minimum, it is a sealable, pressurizable volume, and I guarantee you some creative entrepreneurial firm can figure out something to do with this. So we're encouraging laws that would allow that to be transferred, possessed, whatever, profit made from it. Nobody stays till somebody pays. And of course, we want to see things like, well, hotels. Again, Chuck Lauer's been working on this one for quite a while. This isn't one of his, but this is just an idea for a rotating facility that's gradually having modules added to it and expanded. By the way, one of the ways we're going to encourage this is to say that any expansion of the space station after its initial buildup will be leased from American commercial private providers. No more capital expenditures by the government, no more government facilities ever again built in space after the core space station as currently planned. Now, we're not trying to change the current design of the space station, because we know every time that happens, you go back to the drawing board, $20 billion are added to the budget, the engineers go crazy, everybody goes crazy. We don't even care. However, one thing to keep in mind is if you are indeed one of those people who's going to be leasing private facilities to the government or creating your own facilities and co-locating in Alphatown, you probably don't want to attach physically to the station. That would be like putting a Burger King on the United Nations. You can imagine the paperwork involved there. And of course, the hotel concept is the wild card. Let's say somebody comes to a Chuck Lauer or an external tanks company from NASA and says, well, we want to rent a part of your facility, but we don't want the whole thing, we'll just take a floor or two. Well, the rest can then be opened up and leased however the owners want to do it. And a hotel is probably a good thing. By the way, the high orbit of the station actually works pretty well for tourism. You get to see a lot more of the Earth. The next part of our 3 or 4 mandates for turning the station into something useful for the creation of Alphatown is that all energy needs of the station would be commercially provided by American private providers. By the way, I am still speaking about the American portion of the station, not the other nationalities who will do things in the nature of their countries, whether they're socialist or whatever. We will work in an American way, dealing with our part of the station. However, it's interesting to hear that Daimler-Benz, for example, has come out and called for commercialization of the station. And there's other pressures out there. I'm sure the Japanese would not have a problem with it and would probably start eating us alive as soon as they got the chance to go commercial with it. Anyway, all energy needs of the station commercially provided by American private providers, preferably off-site. What this does, again, jiu-jitsu model, is to take the station and make one of its rationales the development of beamed power, the dream of so many O'Neillians, so many people who have thought that that could be the major wild card in space. In other words, now it becomes part of NASA's mandate to begin testing and developing beamed power. It's a very important concept. In other words, not threatened by it, but their goal is to enable and enhance that. Now, what's interesting there too is, let's say that the beam power works, it becomes a very useful idea. It also means that you don't have to attach more and more solar panels to your station, and your docking maneuvers become really crazy. It means that Chuck Lauer's hotel doesn't have to have his own solar panels causing all kinds of drag that he has to then counter with propellant to keep the station in orbit. We create basically a central utility, and we begin dealing with the idea of mass distribution of energy. Once it gets to a certain point, we could conceivably then begin talking about beaming it back down to the Earth. Again, what happens is this would be no longer a vagabond idea by a bunch of those crazy people out there. It is a part of our national program. Part of the problem we've had in this movement is we've been playing around the edges. We change this little thing out here, and we try and push for this little rocket over here, and we push for this little study over here, but we haven't changed the core driver of what our space program, this multi-billion-dollar thing out there, is doing. And this is getting to the heart of the matter, changing the mandate. And of course, as I said, once we get into this and it turns into a major operation, we can start looking at selling that energy to Earth to replace coal and nuclear energy. We'd like to see new laws encouraging the funding and development of space resources, or the exploration and development of space resources. Everybody's kind of getting psyched up about the idea that the dinosaur killers out there are coming at us. You know, Ed Teller wants to go out there and recycle Star Wars and go nuke it. The Chinese have rationalized their nuclear program on the fact that they want to be able to use those nukes to kill the incoming asteroid. The problem is their rockets don't work. So I wouldn't want to live in the neighborhood when they launch that sucker. But I tell you what, our approach, a frontier approach, is let's not just catch it, let's use it. If we can find them, we can use them. We can push them into useful orbits, we can begin mining and development. There is a whole domain of laws and regulations that will either stop that or that need to be created to enable that. The combination of these activities, and I put this on just for fun, this is an old L5 cover from years ago, but the combination of all these activities, it nicely shows 2 or 3, an asteroid type, solar power, satellite, and large external tanks for the space facility. The combination of these begins the development of Alphatown. The activities begin interacting with each other and catalyzing each other. I know you've been out west and seen in the middle of almost every town out west is an old rotting fort. That is, frankly, as far as we're concerned, 30 or 40, this is maybe somewhat heretical, but somewhere down the road, 30 or 40 years, we don't care what happens to the station in the middle of the town, because the town will have taken off. The station will have done its job, its new job. Right now, it doesn't have one. And what that means for us is that it's going to be a very fundamental change in what it means to be an American. As we begin to lead the world out together, it's going to mean a fundamental change in what it means to be a human being. Again, because we're going together for the first time. We're not attacking each other. We're not pushing our borders out at the expense of somebody else's. We're not discovering somebody who didn't know they needed to be discovered. We're moving outward together in unity. That's a very fundamental change. It is what they call sometimes the moral equivalent of war. Individuals working together, moving out on all fronts, because once we, again, jiu-jitsu, the core national program station, into becoming a frontier-enabling program, that concept will ripple out throughout our space culture, our governmental space culture, our policy culture, our aerospace culture, and the mandate will have been sort of backed into by the government that the frontier is the goal. And we will start moving out on all fronts because resources will be needed in space. We may get them from the moon, we may get them from asteroids, but the frontier will start opening up. Now keep in mind also that these things will go on in parallel. I am not saying again that we have to have one national program called Alphatown and that's it. It is a piece of the pie. But I'll tell you what, having worked in Lunacorp as an entrepreneur for now, oh God, 7 years now, I can tell you this. The government hasn't done anything to try and stop us. Occasionally they started to veer in our direction. We smacked them a little and they moved back. Clementine wanted to send rovers and land them on the moon, and they kind of moved out of the way because that was what Lunacorp was going to do. It was very nice of them. But I'll tell you this, if it were the national mandate to open the space frontier, if space settlement was the avowed and stated goal of America's space program, it would make entrepreneurs like myself, Chuck Lauer, and the other entrepreneurs here have a much easier job raising funds and getting the money we need to create the new enterprises in space, because it would be accepted. When those ports are built beyond the borders, when those government facilities are put out there in the frontier, what it does is it creates a psychological permission to go for it. It's a change. It's a change in the mindset. And probably on a grand scale, it will be interesting as we move into space, because what's going to happen is there's going to be a fundamental change in what it means to be a human being. For the first time since we climbed out of the primordial African valleys and lit that first fire, the human species development will be characterized not as an attack on living things, but as the carrier of life to worlds now dead. That is a complete and total reversal of our relationship with the ecosystem. If you ever have a talk with an environmentalist and want to explain things to them, talk about a tree growing on the moon. After you get past explaining to them that there is no ecosystem there to damage. Everything's going to change when this happens. It's going to mean something very different to look in a mirror as a kid in a few years if we can get our way and open the frontier. And as the cities grow in space, soon we're going to want, or as populations grow in space, soon it's going to be, well, cheaper to commute. I mean, cheaper to live there than to commute. We're going to see people living together in large communities. This is the old Grinnell Sphere from the High Frontier, Dr. O'Neill. Funded, the research by the way, on this was funded by NASA in the 70s when the shuttle was going to fly 50 times a year. Which, by the way, reminds me, we ought to make sure that the X-33 program does stay on track. It doesn't turn into the development of the next space shuttle. Communities of all sorts will start to grow in space. Some of them on single facilities like this, but some small scattered communities all over the place. Again, not one linear program, but a broad front of human beings and human activities moving forward in all kinds of different ways, doing all kinds of different things. And then at some point, we're going to start needing large cities. These are the million people cities. This is one that's a mile across, and something like 7.5 miles long. Houses a million people inside. It's time to dream big dreams. Trees will grow on the moon. Butterflies will fly on Mars. Those are powerful images. Those are powerful ideas. And the American public has not had permission to have those dreams. That's what the Space Frontier Foundation is about. Creating permission to dream for the American people. Allowing them to dream. The entire history of the space program has been characterized by you sit at home and watch it on TV while we, the government, go do it for you. I'll put it this way, in a country that is developed and created based on the free enterprise system, if you look at the most successful single fictional program or whatever that's come out during the history of our space program, we have Star Trek. Okay, it runs in parallel to our space program. Take a close look at Star Trek. A universe populated by cleanly uniformed government employees. And I'll tell you what, guess who the free traders are? The Ferengi. Ladies and gentlemen, you are in a room full of Ferengi. We are the Ferengi. Free enterprise is what we want to do in space. Free enterprise is how we built this country. Free enterprise is how we will open the frontier. But free enterprise with an understanding of our responsibility to the Earth, free enterprise with an understanding of our responsibility to each other this time. It is a new world, new worlds awaiting us out there. Permission to dream. Putting the American face inside the faceplate, looking back out at you. Mr. and Mrs. America, their kids. Turning Generation X into Generation Next. That's the goal of the Space Frontier Foundation. That's what the frontier could be. That's why we need your help. Thank you. Any questions, I guess? I stunned you into silence. All right, please pick up a copy of Space Frontier. Yes, sir.
One thing that's occurred to me some years ago that might help in sort of visualizing Alphatown is that when we start putting multiple things in a single orbit or in an associated orbit, presumably with Space Station Alpha, that what we're going to have to do is that we're going to ultimately be station keeping them all in a row, all strung out, like strip malls along an interstate highway with nodes of activity, a whole chain of things, a wagon train of habitats in orbit.
I think it's a good idea. I wouldn't use the word strip malls when talking to the public. Maybe a string of pearls would be a little bit better analogy.
Something like that.
We have to watch our language out there. I, for example, totally reject the concept of industrial parks. I don't think that sells. An industrial park is only one part of a community. Towns have hotels, restaurants, entertainment facilities. You don't find those in industrial parks. Although I do think one of the fun activities in one of the hotels is going to be watching the goings and comings from the government facilities. I should also point out that this is not about necessarily a co-located series of activities.
Some of it's going to be.
Some of it will be, obviously. Some of it will be, the ones that service each other, etc. The key idea is not the technology. The key idea is not necessarily the individual pieces of this. The key idea is the concept of a town in space. And having everybody who's an entrepreneur, a business person, or a bureaucrat get inside of that mindset and look outward from there and figure out what you would do to make a town grow, to allow a town to grow, to allow the system to work. Now, some people, by the way, have said, you know, oh, the government had nothing to do with the Old West. Forget it. Little thing called Louisiana Purchase. Little thing called guys in blue suits riding on horses would save you every time you got your tail in trouble. The American frontier was enabled to a degree by the attitude of the people in Washington at the time. It was generally and necessarily accepted throughout the American culture at the time that space was a frontier. That is not the case now. So it's no longer sufficient for the government to get out of the way anymore. They have to buy into this and help us sell it. But I think you're right. I think you'll see a whole string of activities up there, literally in a string possibly as well. Next question. Sir.
Does the foundation have a direct dialogue with NASA? And if so, what do you tell them?
A direct dialogue. Yeah, we have some dialogue. I recently testified in front of a committee on NASA restructuring. We talked to them through the media, and indeed, a couple of weeks ago, and again a couple of weeks ago, I met formally with Dan Golden. We do talk to them. We are going to develop the Alphatown concept in Washington. We actually just got some funding to start the project in a serious manner. We expect NASA to be very involved. We know there are a lot of good free enterprise people in NASA just waiting for a chance to have an official mandate to go out and do this kind of thing. And we're very excited about the possibilities of working with them. We've worked against them in the past. There's a problem when you're an organization that has a little thing called principles. Once in a while, things don't go the direction you want them to go, and you have to stand up and fight. But we're working with NASA now. We feel that the tides are starting to turn. And we'll remind them, we'll nudge them when they go off course a little bit. That's part of our job. But yeah, I'm very pleased with the relationship that's starting to develop there. The thing is, we're dealing with an agency that doesn't have much money right now and has the possibility of less and less and less in the future. And what we're doing here, although coming in as one of the station's most bitter opponents in the past with this new idea, is we're actually going to give them one of the best PR vehicles, one of the best possible explanations for what they're doing in the space station that they've ever had. And when this becomes clear, And if they truly adopt it, don't just mouth the words like we've seen so many times in the past. If they truly adopt the concept of Alphatown, that will be a concept that the American people understand and will help them make it through the rough times ahead. Let's say the Russians pull out. We don't have to have the constituency of the week. Like this week it's going to be we're going to cure AIDS up there. This week it's a jobs program for Southern California. American people are not stupid. The American people know that you don't have to have spin-offs to justify a space program. You go out, if you want Velcro, and you create Velcro. And they do it all the time in private industry. But if we give them this mandate, if we give them this concept, this as a flagship, this is something every American understands. Yes, ma'am.
Well, if the concept is to have the fortress that is the little core of your town, why are you going to NASA and not to DOD?
First of all, fortresses were what we used to use in the past when people were shooting back at us. We don't have that problem in space. Okay, so far.
But DOD is as much looking for a mission now as is NASA.
That's fine, I guess. If you wanted to do it under a military structure, though, I think you're going to have a real problem politically, globally, real problems. I mean, if you want to have a staffed military facility up there, you can imagine what would happen.
One point, military has never been able to get a manned program going because they have nobody to fight up there. They never get off the ground.
Right.
They have had 2 or 3 programs, and every one of them has been canceled.
Right. Now, at some point down the road, when there are enough people up there, as is the case on any frontier, you will have to have police forces, et cetera, to establish rules. But I don't think it's a good idea to start out with a military type facility. Military does not operate under the rules of free enterprise either, although they seem to do a lot better at it sometimes in developing new programs, such as the DCX. Next question. Yes, sir.
You indicated you were getting some funding to actually further pursue this Alphatown concept. Where's the funding coming from?
Crazy private individuals. One of them just spoke to you at the last section. Yeah, we're working it, and we're going to look for a lot more. We're talking to Boeing. We're talking to the people involved. Keep in mind, the Chamber of Commerce, sometimes in a small town, is indeed dominated by the largest company there, the idea of the company town. And so we may, get Boeing on board to get involved in a large way on this if we can. And then the smaller companies will come in as well and sit at that same table because they need the same mandates, the same laws, the same ability to make a profit as Boeing does. Now, we're also fighting to make sure that the company that's taking over the shuttle doesn't extend its reach all the way up into space and take over the station as well. Okay, we want to see, what is it called, American Space Lines, maybe running the space shuttle. But we want them to have to negotiate on a business basis with Boeing, let's say, who's operating the station. A lot more fun that way. Next question? Sir.
What's the space station concept depicted in 2001: A Space Odyssey? What's your view of that?
The Taurus?
Yeah.
Well, they're great. I mean, it's an early stage. The Taurus was also looked at, I think, in the summer study in 1977, 78. And it was one of the viable designs that was looked at. But that won't be built until there's, a demand for it. It's not something you go out and mandate. I'll put it this way, every government-planned city in America has failed. Every city where the government has said, we're back in the 70s, that really did a lot of this. In fact, Tom Rogers was the guy they used to send around to beat him up for doing it wrong. He used to work for Lyndon Johnson. And I'm sure if you get him going at lunch, you'll hear some great Lyndon Johnson stories about that. But all of the cities where the government has tried to build the actual city itself, i.e., let's say you took the Alphatown concept and actually we're doing it by connecting to the station and building to that. Those types of things have always failed in the past. Sir.
Regarding the previous question regarding the Taurus space station, one of the things we've learned from Skylab and Mir and the lunar landing astronauts is that the general consensus is that low gravity, like 1/6 gravity, is for day-to-day living a lot more preferable than zero gravity. And I suspect that once we start building multiple habitats up there, we're going to see a lot of the habitats built for 1/6 to 1/3 G with zero G components at the hubs.
Yeah, I think it's
dumbbell type structure.
well, Right, well, you saw the external tank tethered structure, which, if this were a video, would have been rotating, as was the hotel concept. Yeah, I think once you're up
And that's
there,
going to be an industry's option, the builder's option, not the government option.
One of the great
We have
things-
a chance to try all the varieties.
right, one of the great things about space is you can vary your gravity, which you cannot do on a planet. That was one of Dr. O'Neill's big tenets regarding the development of cities in space, was that that's the only place, if you wanted to go to 1G, for example, you could do it other than the Earth's surface in the solar system. Wherever you land, Mars or the moon or wherever, you have a problem with different gravities. So, you know, if I can persuade my good friend Zuber to quit trashing the rest of the locations of the system other than Mars, we can all go out there together. Each one of us can go to where we want to go. Free space, Mars, moon, asteroids. It's all open. We can do all of it. And we can provide our own gravity, our own environments, something you can't do here on the Earth. Next question. Great. Oh, yes, sir.
Last comment, Rick, let them know that the space fronts are on the table back here.
Oh, yeah. That's Ben Yanez, by the way, who's running our, former head of ISDC, is running our conference. I want to invite you all to our space conference in the fall. We're a contrary organization. Everybody else is in the spring, so of course we went to the fall. Everybody else on the East Coast, so of course we went to California. But I do want to invite you all out. I do want you to get the more recent issue of Spacefront, our magazine. I do invite you to get involved and change everything from within. Thank you very much.